Welcome back. Welcome to another edition of Nain Short. Sorry we've been absent for about a week. Stuff comes up, things need to get done, and well, we're still back at it. As you can see, I'm still in my training stuff, so training continues. It doesn't stop. And we do love the comments that people add. Somebody actually asked a question, and I wanted to answer it a bit more thoroughly in reference to do as Filipino art practitioners, do we walk around with our kali sticks, with our anise sticks? And the simple answer to that is no. No, we do not. Unless we're coming to or from class itself. But then again, there are people who practice the katana. There are a variety of weapons in the kung fu world that people practice and hone and get really good at, but no one really walks around with any of these weapons. So then the question is, why then train with them? And there's various reasons behind it. Sometimes the art itself is a weapons art, such as the katana, whether you're learning drawing techniques, whether you're learning the art of war itself through the eyes of a samurai. You learn the traditional arts, you learn how to use the sword, you learn your cuts and you learn your parries and everything that goes along with it for the sake of the art. But you don't walk around with a sword. It would be cool to do so, because I do love the katana, but it's very impractical in today's age to do so. No, not to mention there really wouldn't be a need for it. So then why do we practice things like the claymore, even in the Western arts, where you have the longsword, you have the claymore, you have the poleaxe, you have all these other variant weapons that come from a time of war that people still enjoy using and training with, but don't necessarily use or carry around. It is part of the art, the history of the people, and it just is cool. For a lot of us, we just really enjoy using weapons that way. Now, there is still a place for weapons to be used in our modern era. You have military personnel who still use weapons, who still use firearms, rifles, their secondary sidearms, and even their tertiary, oftentimes a knife. So they do learn how to transfer from one to the other to the third, so they can get back to their primary, because that's the situation. You don't know what you're going to be in. You don't know if you're going to run out of bullets, whether you need to kill somebody without making sound. These are then reasons why people would practice. Even the rifle itself is often used beyond just shooting bullets. If you're in a close quarter in an urban environment where you can clear space, use it for leverage so you can get to your secondary, so you can clear and then get back to your primary. Or there are different techniques that I've seen and heard of where the point is to get the opponent down to clear the muzzle so you can take the shot, even at close proximity. So all these weapon ideas are still usable and viable in different forms. Then you have something a little closer to home. You have police officers. They carry a gun. They also carry a taser, they carry a baton, and all these other fun little things in their utility belt that do require practice and some understanding. But what's the commonality if we're talking about guns and, say, a stick or a knife, a sword? And for me, it breaks down to three simple ideas. Whatever tool you have in your hand, first of all, is just that, a tool. On its own, it's not going to do anything. But once it's in your hand, once you have the intent to use it as a weapon, it can do one of three major things. It's going to either be an impact weapon, it's going to crush or strike. It's going to be a slashing weapon, it's going to cut, create a gash, or it's going to pierce. You can stab with it. Those are the three primary ideas of what any of these weapons can do. Some can do multiple of them, and depending on the size, the length, the weight, it might do all three at once. It can pierce, crush, and it's going to cleave something in half. removing a limb perhaps. Who knows? There are weapons designed to do those things as well. But ultimately, regardless of what the specifics of each tool is, it requires the hand to move it. It requires the person to have the intent to cause harm, which then brings to those improvised weapons. Take a baseball bat or a hammer. How many people actually train those things as weapons? There are some people that do, and they do some really cool things with them. But ultimately, you just have to understand that if I swing this hard enough and make contact, it's going to hurt the person I'm swinging at. And ultimately, it's having that idea to do so that creates the issue. There are people in penitentiaries today without any training figured out how to use household things, or even things requiring intent to cut or slash or stab, to create a lot of harm to somebody. So yes, the commonality between all these things is the human hand, the movements themselves. So some people have taken the stuff that they learned in their traditional arts, in weapons that you don't walk around with, and start applying them to things such as a cane. When somebody looks old enough to walk around with a cane, guess what? Some of those slashing arts, some of those piercing arts that you do with a staff, with a spear, with a sword, are now being translated to the cane itself, similar to this stick. So that's how then you take that training of the traditional arts and you start using it in something more practical. You find yourself in a situation where all you have is a hammer. Are you just going to give up because you've never trained how to use a hammer as a weapon? Or do you understand enough to know that, okay, when you do this to a hammer, the heavy part hits. Or if I turn it around and use the claw part, oh, it's probably going to stab something. And if your intent is to protect yourself from somebody trying to harm you, are you really going to consider those things, or are you just going to swing the hell out of that hammer? But if you take just a moment to understand, it's either going to impact, it's either going to stab, or it's going to cut. A hammer, probably not going to cut, but it does have claws, so it will probably pierce, and it has a flat side with weight, so it's probably going to crush, and it's going to hurt. How far you intend to go with it? Well, it depends on the situation in which you find yourself, where you need a hammer as a weapon. So ultimately, if we just take the time to consider what are the commonality behind things, because the differences are easy to see. There are arts created based on the differences of the weapons, their length, their size, their vulnerabilities, and the arts have been created around them as well because of those things. But if we look at the things that they have in common, it's either going to create impact, it's either going to cut, or it's going to pierce something. Even guns themselves, the bullets pierce, and there are bullets that are meant to just create impact as well. Sure, the versatility is different and its use is widely spread because it's a bit easier to pull a trigger and aim something than it is to learn an entire art on how to wield a specific type of knife, like a karambit. But that doesn't mean it doesn't require skill, and that doesn't mean that it doesn't require the mentality to actually use it as a weapon to do any of those things. So if we take the time to consider all those, then these movements. Even though it's an impact weapon that's in my hand right now via a stick, I can still think about blade orientation, because if you've ever held a blade, you have a pretty good sense of where it fits in your hand. So, okay, that cut is still a cut with a stick. So now I'm practicing both impact and slashing at the same time, because my mentality is no longer I'm learning how to wield the stick. I'm learning how to wield the body that drives every other weapon that I'm going to use, or even my body itself becoming the weapon, because I have nothing else but my empty hands. So now the impact of a hammer fist, or a chop, or a punch, or just a knuckle scrape, if that's all I want to do, depending on the situation that I'm in. But I'm learning the movements themselves. I'm refining the movements. So when I put anything in my hand, whether it's a stick or a knife, now the changes are very minimal. Now I only have to consider, what's my range with this? What can I really do with it? Am I creating impact, or am I slashing, or am I puncturing something? And that gives me a bit more options. Is it going to make me an expert in that particular weapon? No, not at all. But I would hope it would give me a leg up in a situation where that's all I have, where I don't have any other options. And if I keep it simple enough, well, then the transition between one or the other is going to be that much simpler as well, without necessarily having to learn an entire new art just to be able to do it. Now, does it mean we shouldn't practice those arts? No, not at all. Those arts are awesome. There's the katana form that I was taught by a good friend, Sijo Johnny Oliva, that I really enjoy. Am I going to walk around with a katana? No, but it is still really good to know. But if we can just focus on the commonality, then it might give us a bit of a leg up when it comes to a situation where we are not prepared, where we do not have our weapon of choice, and we have to get the hell out of Dodge, but we have to go through somebody in order to do so safely. And that's all. So, do we walk around with our sticks? No, not physically, but mentally. We constantly have a weapon in our hands, whether it is our hand itself or anything we could pick up, even our cell phones. Because the mentality itself is what drives the ability to be able to use any one of these tools to its lethality, or anything short of that, depending on the situation that you find yourself in. So, I hope that answers your question a bit more thoroughly. Still, if you guys have any other questions, please feel free to ask. Any comments, we'd love to hear from you in reference to what you think, what your points of view are, because we're constantly learning, and as many points of views as we get a broader picture of what's really out there. So, thank you very much for joining me on another one of Nain's Shorts. Until the next one, 3, 2, 1, cut!